I'm going to show you how to make my cuddly penguin from Kreative Kiwi. For this I'm going to be using 2 hoops, a 4x4 with 2 layers of washaway stabiliser for the feet, and a 5x7 with 2 layers of washaway stabiliser, a selection of threads, and I've got 3, the orange, the black and the white, that have got matching bobbins. The orange because you're going to see both sides of the feet, the black and the white because they're high contrasting and they're going to be one on top of each other for the eyes, so I prefer to use a matching bobbin to avoid any of the other colour showing through. I've got my squizzers, some pins with heads on them, masking tape, my felt for the feet and some polar fleece for the body, a sharp pair of fabric scissors for trimming up, and some chopped up pieces of batting that I'm going to use for stuffing him. You'll find a link to this design in the video description below. Load your file for the feet into your machine along with a matching bobbin and thread for them. Then we're going to hoop and pin our 2 layers of washaway stabiliser. You could use tearaway if you wanted to for this. And then we're going to pin around the top edge of the hoop, and that's going to stop our stabiliser from being pulled down between the 2 hoop parts. It's a good habit to get into. Take a pin, any pin with a head will work, place it on top of the inside hoop, push it through, bring it round and back through again. And that will anchor it, and you're going to do that on all 4 sides. The larger your hoop, the more pins you would use, of course. You're now going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 1, and that's going to give you a placement outline for the felt of his feet. So take your felt, fold it in 2 and align the open edge with the ends of the stitch lines and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 2 to secure it. We're now going to free the feet from the hoop. And we're going to trim around to cut them out following the outside stitch line, and we're actually going to cut on top of the outside stitch line. I'm just going to remove some of this excess here so it's not in the way. Okay. So now I'm going to cut around on the outside stitch line. And I'm going to remove the excess stabiliser as well, just by cutting around the inside, taking care not to cut your stitches. You don't have to go right up to the stitch line for this, it's just to remove the bulk, because eventually we're going to remove it with some water and a cotton bud. That's our first foot done. And that's our second foot. You can now set them aside for the minute. We now come to the second hooping, which is the body, so load that file into your machine along with your thread colour for the black of the body. I'm using black, of course, and you're going to hoop and pin your 2 layers of wash away stabiliser as per the first hooping. Then you're going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 1, and that's going to give you your placement outline for your fabric. Place your black fabric over the outline and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 2. That's going to secure the fabric, and it's also going to give you a placement outline for your white fabric for the belly and the head. We're going to trim out the centre of the black fabric, cutting around the inner stitch line. Place your fabric for the head and belly over the top and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 3 to secure it. Trim away the excess fabric from around the edge of the stitch line, taking care of course not to cut any stitches. You're now going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 4, and that's going to zigzag this edge. We're now going to stitch round number 5, and that's going to do the satin stitch border around the head and belly, and I'm staying with black for this. Load your thread colour for the black of his eyes and beak into your machine, and then stitch round number 6. Load your white thread colour into your machine, and I've loaded my matching bobbin as well, and then you're going to stitch round number 7. Load your red thread colour for the mouth into your machine, and then stitch round number 8. Load your first colour for the beak into your machine. I'm using orange for my beak, so I've loaded a dark orange in first, and then we're going to stitch round number 9. Load your second colour for the beak into your machine. I'm using a lighter orange, and then stitch round number 10. We're now going to place the feet, and on the back of my feet I've put a mark so that you can see what I'm doing, and we're going to align those 2 marks, which is where the curve stops and goes into a straight line each side, with the outer stitch line of the penguin. I realise that you can't see this very well, but it will be obvious when you've stitched yours. So you want the longest straight edge to the outside. So that's wrong, that's right, and you're going to align these 2 points up here on this outer stitch line, and then tape them in place. I'm going to do the same with the other one now. Then we're going to place our backing fabric, and this will be the back of the penguin eventually, over the top, and tape that in place as well. I'm using up scraps, and it was a little bit short, so I've just stretched it a little bit, because once it's all made and stuffed, nobody's going to know. We're now going to stitch the backing and the feet in place. So load a neutral thread and bobbin into your machine to match your fabric, of course, in which case I'd normally use black. and then you're going to stitch round number 11. Now I've loaded orange into my machine deliberately so that you can see exactly what's stitching and what I'm referring to in the following steps after this. So now that all the stitching is finished, we're now going to remove the excess stabiliser from the back of the penguin, and taking care not to cut your fabrics underneath, just slit a hole in and trim around the edge. So make sure that I've got both stabilisers. And we can now free our penguin from the hoop completely, just by cutting around the edge. Take care not to cut your fabric underneath. So that's going to be the front of our penguin when it's turned out the right way. I've just had a technical hitch. My recording wasn't recording, so I'd already made some cuts, so I apologise for that. But what we're going to do, where the gap is, where the stitching starts and stops for the gap, we're going to cut towards the points where, so that you've got this where the gap is. And that's going to mean that when we sew up that edge, it's going to be a lot easier. And then we're going to trim around the edge, and it's easier to work from the back, from the front rather than the back, leaving at least 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. Before we go any further, everywhere where there's an internal angle at each side of his wings, we're going to cut towards the stitch line without cutting it. This will allow our fabric to flex when it comes to the corners and will avoid puckering. And now we can turn it out the right way. I can remove the tape from the feet as well. I'm just going to run my finger around the seam just to make sure that it's all pushed out. My plan for stitching in orange so that you could see it didn't quite work out is to do with the fabric. It's a polar fleece and it hides stitching very well, probably except when you want it to. Okay, so I'm just going to insert a little tool just to push out the wings. And there we are. And those are the two flaps that we left for the stuffing, which we will tuck in afterwards, and it makes sewing up the gap much simpler. So we're now going to stuff him and bring him to life. So we're now going to start the stuffing process. I've got my laundry net full of chopped up pieces of batting, and I'm going to put them inside now. A pair of forceps, if you've got them, works wonders. Oops. I think that's enough in there now, and I'm just going to tuck these little flaps in. I'm going to follow the contour of the other edge so that I've got the same amount of black both sides. I'm now going to stitch that up. So I've got my needle and thread, and I'm just going to catch the corner there so that the knot forms inside rather than out, and then I'm just going to overstitch really. You can do a better job of this than I am right now, as you've got more time. Tie that off and just push my needle through and bring it up anywhere in the body, and that will hide the ends. When I put it tight, that will go back down inside the penguin. And now we just need to redistribute some of the stuffing so that he looks all nice and even. All that remains to do now is to dissolve the excess wash away from the back here. So I've got some warm water and a cotton bud. Just going to trim off these bits and pieces. Take your cotton bud, dip it in, and just wipe it around the edge. If you're making lots of these, you could throw them in the wash before you stuff them, get rid of all the wash away, and then stuff them and seal them. And there he is, our cuddly penguin. I hope you enjoyed this stitch along. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to do all the YouTubey things, like, subscribe, share, and do leave me a comment, tell me what you think of him. Pop along to Creative Kiwi's Facebook group. There's always lots of ideas, help and inspiration there for everybody, and it's a great place to share your Creative Kiwi makes. And thank you very much for joining me. You'll find a link to this design in the video description below, along with lots of other information such as where I get my supplies and some discount codes for you as well.